Now, trouble keeps finding itself with the motorsports regulator. The FIA found itself under a lot of scrutiny after the Austin GP, with the primary talking point being the penalties handed to Russell and Norris. Even more importantly, the ones not given to Verstappen for the racing maneuvers he's shown against Norris and Sainz. While there are proofs and arguments that go in the Dutchman's favour, it's obvious there needs to be a lot of restructuring of the rulebook because now it seems like circuits like Austin don't promote fair and clean racing. But with the latest comments made from McLaren and Mercedes towards the FIA, will the governing body change something? And more importantly, will this add more negative spotlight regarding the stewards' decisions on the race? Now, one of the darkest points of the Austin GP was the stewards' decisions regarding certain situations, such as the penalty of Norris when he tried and completed a pass on Verstappen from the outside of turn 12 in lap 52. Obviously, the penalty was for Norris completing an overtake outside of the track, even though Verstappen had also left the white lines at that point. But what's worth mentioning is the fact that Norris was not ahead of Verstappen at the apex, which wasn't the case with the Russell-Bottas fight or with the early stage fight that Verstappen had with Sainz. Now, this is where the problem lies. What does ahead of the apex actually mean, and does it promote fair racing? Because from what we saw at lap 1, turn 1, Verstappen didn't even actually try to turn the car. He was just sending it straight in order to be ahead of Norris, who was turning the car left, and by the time they reached the apex, the dive bomb of Verstappen was successful to the point of him being ahead of Norris, and the Brit had to abandon any type of fight. This is something that the McLaren driver has spoken about, saying that the offence of Verstappen was quite harsh and not according to the rulebook. So when talking about it to a greater extent, the Brit said, Verstappen went off track because he over-defended and he made a mistake, but he's gained from that. I had to go off to avoid him. With Max, you've got to commit, you cannot go half-hearted, and people don't understand that kind of thing. It's impossible to know if I could have stayed on the track without that. Therefore, you cannot steward that kind of thing. It's just a rushed decision and they don't hear or understand our points, which they should do after the race. They just want to make a decision at the time, and you can't appeal this kind of penalty, which is again a silly thing because they're just guessing, and I don't think that's how stewarding should be done. And the FIA's decision to penalise Russell for a battle that, in fact, wasn't even a battle because Bottas wasn't really an obstacle for the Mercedes car is something that Toto Wolff is unable to comprehend. Jumping on the radio and stating that the penalty is a joke and Russell needs to keep his head down and hunt for more points. The Brit finished P6 ahead of Perez, even though he started from the pit lane with an old spec car from Singapore. But nevertheless, Wolff believes that the presence of certain individuals as stewards is now affecting the sport's nature to a greater extent. The team principal of Mercedes didn't want to be too explicit, but when talking about this matter, he hinted that a potential relationship between the steward of the Austin GP and Honda could have affected the team in a different way. For example, not investigating the situations in which Verstappen found himself under threat to be penalised. Talking about it furthermore, Wolff said, Verstappen didn't get a penalty, and at the end, Lando got a penalty for being forced off and overtaking on the outside. I guess it's a bit biased decision making, but I'm not surprised. It's inconsistent. I think with Valtteri, it wasn't even a race. We've seen a few of those incidents that were exactly the same and that weren't penalised for racing for positions. Receiving that penalty for Russell is just completely odd and bizarre. I think we know why, but I can't say that on television. Sometimes there are correlations. I think the stewards are in a really difficult situation. There's always going to be one that's happy and the other one unhappy. Now, the belief that the consistency of the officiating was not on point is now all over social media, and some pundits and former F1 champions, like Damon Hill, believe that there needs to be a massive change in this area. On the other hand, he feels quite disappointed that the FIA didn't do anything to investigate why Verstappen just plunged on the inside of turn 1 in a manner of make it or break it, as it did look like he could care less if he makes it past the corner or not because he doesn't have a lot to lose if both he and Norris crash out. This is a manner that Verstappen has shown in Austria this year as well as throughout the entirety of 2021. However, the new rules have somehow protected him because as long as he's ahead of the apex, he's in control of the corner and he can dictate the tempo entering that particular corner. The fact that there are few drivers on the grid who know how to race Verstappen stands as it is. Leclerc and Hamilton are probably the only ones who understand his tactics and maneuvers, and that's been shown throughout 2022 and 2023, as we do hope that in 2025 we'll see more clean racing between the Monegasque and the Dutchman for the championship. Elaborating further on this extent, Damon Hill said, "I'm not convinced the stewarding was consistent in that race, but Lando went deep to pass and did so off track. That said, Max did not give him room on the exit and barged him off the track in turn 1, lap 1. The rules need to be better." The FIA has given an official statement regarding the decision as to why Norris was penalised for something that McLaren believed they would see Verstappen undergo an investigation, which led to their instructions to not give Norris the opportunity to give the position back to Verstappen because he overtook him outside of the track. Again, Norris's penalty was for something very different compared to Verstappen's driving style, and you would have thought that the Brit has learned his mistake from Austria and wait for his time now that he is a more superior car. But the lack of top speed as well as the first sector dominance from Verstappen were just too much to handle for Norris, and maybe that's what caused the desperate action on the 52nd lap of the race. Elaborating further on this extent, the official statement of the FIA wrote, "The stewards reviewed positioning, marshalling system data, video and in-car video evidence. Car 4 was overtaking Car 1 on the outside but was not level with Car 1 at the apex. Therefore, under the driving standards guidelines, Car 4 had lost the right to the corner. Accordingly, as Car 4 left the track and returned in front of Car 1, it's deemed to be a case of leaving the track and gaining and lasting an advantage. A 5-second penalty is imposed instead of the 10-second penalty recommended in the guidelines because, having committed to the overtaking move on the outside, the driver of Car 4 had little alternative other than to leave the track because of the proximity of Car 1, which had also left the track. In view of the above, we determined that this will not count as a track limit strike for Car 4. Be that as it may, the FIA would have a lot to deal with now, especially because the rulebook seems flawed to the point of the drivers exploiting the maximum out of it. Obviously, that didn't bode well with the Woking-based squad, and Andrea Stella is done defending the antics of Verstappen, stating that there have been too many times in which his defensive and attacking maneuvers have put other drivers in much greater danger than they would originally think. But Norris should have known better when he chased the spot of Verstappen. This is a man who kept the 2021 version of Hamilton for the majority of the season behind him in his first try to the championship. So it's easy to understand why he wouldn't have that big of an issue with Norris if the cars are more or less similar in performance. As for Verstappen, he doesn't feel any sympathy for McLaren because they're the team that have complained quite a lot in the past, as he went on to remind Norris that back in 2017 he suffered from the same fate as he was young and inexperienced when racing against Raikkonen, losing the podium finish at the end. Talking about the situation, Verstappen said, "No, I don't sympathise with McLaren. I mean, they complain a lot lately anyway, but it's very clear in the rules. Outside the white line, you cannot pass. I've been done for it as well in the past. I lost my podium like that in 2017's USA GP. So I just remained calm and tried to do the best I could after that to bring the car to the end because it was not easy with the tyres and the situation that I was in. Overall, I still really enjoyed the battle we had." Well, with all this in mind, do you think that there should be a change in the ruling of the FIA? And more importantly, do you think that they have what it takes to make the sport more interesting and competitive to watch? Let us know in the comments down below.